Tov. Welcome. Yeah, Jesse, but we're still live? Text coming around. For those of us who are joining us online, welcome. Right above the box, the screen that you're looking at online, there's a link that says link to text sheet or something like that, and you can click on that and you'll be able to follow along with Rabbi Artson's text as well. Just want to take a moment to welcome everybody into the Beit Midrash for some learning. Like, it's I don't know, of the things we just don't want to take for granted. Spaces that it used to feel obvious that on a Tuesday night we would be in the Biran Beit Midrash learning text with one of your clergy or a scholar from around the world, and it's good to be in this space doing that. Second, we are grateful, and we had a chance to talk a little bit earlier about this, but we're very grateful that we have members of our community who are inspired to help inspire others by bringing in some of the great scholars from around the world year after year after year. And so we want to, in particular tonight, though we are grateful for everybody's support of the Makom DC program, thank Sandy and Adina Mendelson for the Mendelson Scholarship Series, which has been for as many years as we've been here, bringing scholars in on a regular basis. They most often will happen on Saturday afternoons, a tradition that we look forward to bringing back into the Beit Midrash. And we are also grateful tonight to be able to have Rabbi Bradley Shavit Artson as an Annie Bass Yellen scholar. The Annie Bass Yellen Scholar Fund has been donated by Rhoda Ritzenberg, by Rhoda Ankent, by Rhoda Ritzenberg, primarily in honor of her grandmother. And the idea of, in her name, bringing scholarship in over and over and over again, especially at the end of each year as we think about our learning in total, has been just an inspiration for us. So thank you very much.
Hi everybody. It's so nice to see you in person. And some of you I've been with all day in the heat and now in the cool. So tonight is also a culmination, it's a siyum of our learning for the year. Obviously learning will continue beyond today, I promise. But this is the culmination of the year that we've done in Makom DC and in many of our learning groups. And I have to say that this day it's been a very weepy day for me. As you all know, grief is like this. And so today it's just hit me like a ton of bricks. I want to say to you that many of you know I've had two of the hardest years of my life. And through being with one of my kids who's suffered enormously and losing my dad, Torah has kept me buoyant. And that is, whether it's teachings that I return to, one of them I taught in Sisterhood today at a Sisterhood Torah study session. Whether that's Mourner's Kaddish, of just returning to that liturgy day in and day out, or as it like is going for me these days, not every day. Might as well be honest about what our practices are. And I just think that Torah is life. It is a way of us connecting to the deepest parts of ourselves, of finding meaning, of finding spiritual nourishment, of trying to figure out how to survive when you're shipwrecked, which was the sugya that we studied today. And I'm so grateful to study with all of you, and I'm so grateful to have this space. And I'm not introducing Rabbi Artson, but I'm so grateful for rabbis because he is my rabbi. I was not gifted enough to go to AJU because I needed to stay on the East Coast. But he has become my rabbi through my amazing chavrutot, and he has been my rabbi in teaching and also in life. I'm very grateful. So happy to have you.
I get to actually introduce you, but don't worry, Rabbi Alexander gave me your bio, and then he highlighted the things that he wants me to highlight. which is so great, and like that's also like what our chavruta used to be like in rabbinical school. So it feels apt that that would be how I'm introducing it. I'm gonna like take a little. I'm gonna say the things that make you sound like the scholar that you are, but then I'm also going to take a little leeway for some Torah. Rabbi Bradley Shavit Artson is the vice president of the American Jewish University and the Abner and Rosalind Goldstein Dean's Chair of the Ziegler School of Rabbinic Studies, and he's also a professor of philosophy. He's the author of 12 books and over 250 articles. He was for 10 years the rabbi of Congregation Adas in Mission Viejo, which grew by leaps and bounds while he was there. In 1999, to my and Rabbi Alexander's good fortune, he began his work at the University of Judaism, now the AJU, as the dean of the rabbinical school. His scholarly fields are Jewish philosophy and theology, particularly a process approach, integrating contemporary scientific insights from cosmology, quantum physics, evolutionary theory, and neuroscience, to a dynamic view of God, Torah, mitzvot, and ethics. He is a charter member of the Society for the Study of Judaism and Science. I was studying a text today with a group. Don't worry, nobody here missed it. It wasn't an Adas group. And it's from one of Rabbi Alexander's most favorite texts, Pirkei Avot. And it comes in the 6th chapter, which is actually does not actually belong. It was an additional chapter that was added comes from the 9th century in Iraq. And this is the text. Rabbi Yossi ben Kisma said, once I was walking by the way when a man met me and greeted me, and I greeted him. And he said to me, Rabbi, where are you from? I said to him, I'm from a great city of sages and scribes. And he said to me, Rabbi, would you consider living with us in our place? I would give you 1,000 denarii of gold and precious stones and pearls. I said to him, my son, even if you were to give me the silver and gold precious stones that are all the precious stones that are in the world, I would not dwell anywhere except in a place of Torah. For when a person passes away, though neither gold nor silver nor precious stones nor pearls accompany him, but only the Torah does. So there's nobody in my life that I think embodies this teaching more than you, creating a true place of Torah for everybody who walks through the doors of the Ziegler School, but more than that, everybody who walks through your life in any way and experiences your teaching in any way. So on behalf of the Jewish people, I'll just use a little chutzpah and say thank you for creating places of Torah for all of us and for so many people. And without further ado, I'm not going to take your text sheet.
I don't need this, I don't think. I just think that what's particularly impressive about that gross exaggeration, which was lovely, and I only wish my mother were here to offer the rebuttal. Did I turn it on? Higher. Better? Why don't I just hold that? How's this? Okay, good. So, but I think that it's very slick to have a rabbi who tells you that you've created a place of Torah while she's actually literally stealing your Torah. So right before you're supposed to teach, that's really, I'm going to think about that a lot. Here's what I want us to do tonight. I have been told I'm idiosyncratic as far as rabbis go for several reasons. The one I want to focus on here is I often see things differently than my colleagues do. I don't think that's because they're wrong necessarily. It just means I had a different upbringing and personality. So when we read about Hillel and Shammai, two great sages from the end of the Second Temple period, we are supposed to side with Hillel. That's in part because the literature we have was written by the students of Hillel's academy. And so, as often happens, there is never a rabbi so great as after they die. Personally, I'm looking forward to the posthumous reviews. So the students of Hillel portray Hillel as this paradigm of compassion, endless patience, graciously accommodating everybody, and Shammai is a foil for that. So he's the one who loses his temper, he's the one who doesn't put up with people, And it even got enshrined, you know that beautiful famous menorah that's outside the Knesset building, the legislature building in Israel, this, right? So it's got a statue of one of the stories we're going to look at, of this guy who's standing on one foot, and Hillel is patiently telling him the entire Torah in 1 foot. What is not portrayed on that same menorah is that when he tried that with Shammai, Shammai took an architect's stick and tried to decapitate him. Different rabbinic response. Here's what I want to argue. I think those Hillel stories make me want to puke. They are utterly infantilizing to congregants. The assumption that rabbis have all the answers and they should be available the minute you want them, in whatever way you need them, at any given time, is grossly irresponsible. And it drives good people from the rabbinate, and it drives adults to assume this infantile posture vis-a-vis the rabbi. It happens in American homes all over the place. Kid comes up to their parents and says, "Who's God?" And the answer isn't an answer. The answer is, "Let's go talk to the rabbi." Which parents don't do when the kid asks, "Who should I vote for president?" Or "Who should I blame for whatever I want to blame?" Or "How should I invest my money?" Parents have opinions in all kinds of stuff they know nothing about. But anything that falls into the rabbi territory, now that you got to go talk to the rabbi about. And what kids correctly hear from that is, you don't need to know about that if you're a grown-up. I mean, we pay one grown-up who's kind of like a grown-up kid to I wasn't pointing just at one of them in particular. They do. So what I want to point at is the root of that problem. So you don't have to agree with me. Nobody has to agree with me. But I want to teach these stories from that very idiosyncratic perspective. Okay, so just remember, if you study this with any other rabbi alive, you'll get the Hillel version of the story, and it's all sweetness and light. But I'm going to make you see things in the story that you might not otherwise have noticed. Okay, we ready? Here we go. I have this story in the original language, and I have it in English translation as well. For the sake of moving along, I'm going to read it in English, and then if you want to look along at the Hebrew either now or later, you are welcome to. So you'll start on the page that has a 1 at the bottom. That's currently how we do it. If you start at page 2, that's fine, but that's going to, don't. Our rabbis taught that one should always be gentle like Hillel and not impatient like Shammai. That, by the way, for those of you who are scholars of literature, is an editorial lead, right? And the editor of this story is trying to guide your opinion in a particular direction. So far, you with me? They want us to think gentle Hillel, good, and impatient Shammai, bad. And now we're going to get a bunch of stories to make that point. It once happened that 2 men made a wager with each other, saying the one who goes and makes Hillel angry will get 400 zuz. And the other said, I will go and be the one to make him really angry. Now, I want to point out to you, this is kind of a humorous beginning to a story, right? I mean, that's funny. But it's predicated on the idea that it's both fun and sporting to so aggravate Hillel to see if you can really make him lose it. Okay? And that's because everyone knows how patient Hillel is. So yeah, Mr. Patient, let's see if he can handle me. All right, so he goes to him, and it's Erev Shabbat, which is to say the Sabbath is about to start, a couple hours away. And Hillel is washing his hair. Can we just take time out to examine what washing your hair in the Second Temple period meant? Right? It means you go and you schlep buckets of water from a spring. Spring water, for those of you who live in the 21st century, you may not know this, is very cold. So to heat it up to wash your hair, you have to make a fire. There are no pre-crushed logs. There's no electric stove. You do that by striking a flint, getting a fire, building it up, put the water on it. It takes a long time and a lot of work. If you weren't schwitzy beforehand, you are now. Then you stand in a great big tub and you pour water over yourself and you get sudsy with whatever plant material gets sudsy for you, right? That's what he has now done. He is now covered with suds, standing in a tub in a home that has no plumbing or electricity. And this guy shows up outside on Friday afternoon and shouts out, "Is Hillel there? Is Hillel there?" And Hillel responds by putting on a robe, removing all the soap, getting out of the water, and going outside and saying, "My son, what is it that you require?" Ugh. The man says, "I have a question." And patient Hillel says, "Ask my son." Whereupon he said, "Why are the heads of Babylonians round?" Now this is what in Aramaic is called a klutz kasha. Right? For those of you who don't understand ancient languages, that means a dumb question. Right? He's on purpose asking a question that would annoy a rabbi. Right? Like, it's just ridiculous. Give me a break. But he asks him this question, and Hillel says, instead of getting aggravated, "My son, you have asked a great question." And then he has an answer because they don't have skillful midwives. A word about that. Back in the day, when the world was in black and white and we had no computers, sometimes you would remove a baby from inside its mother using forceps. Because think of what kind of a towering intellect I might have had they not squooshed my brains the way they did to get me out. Somebody in this room has a great sense of humor. I want you to notice that a real rabbi knows the answer. Right? He's asking the most obscure, but the great Hillel not only doesn't get annoyed, but of course, without having to look it up, he knows the answer to that question because he's a rabbi, and rabbis are supposed to know everything. You hear some passion in my voice, don't you? So the man goes away for a while, and then he waits until Hillel is back in the shower. Naked again, warmed up the water again, put on the soap, and then he stands outside and says again, "Is Hillel here?" So again, he washes off the soap, gets out of the tub, puts on a robe, comes outside. "What do you want?" And he says, "I have a question. Ask my son." So he says, "Why are the eyes of Palmyreans bleared?" Another question. So he says again, that's a great question, and the answer is because they live in sandy places. You understand what he's saying? That the shape of their eyes has been influenced in a Lamarckian, Darwinian way by the constantly blowing sand. Right? He knows this. That's amazing. The guy waits again. Hillel goes back into the shower, warms up the water again, soap all over the place, and then he says, "Hillel, Hillel." Hillel comes out again, and the guy asks him another question. Okay, and this is, why are the feet of Africans wide? I want to say something about the role of Africa in rabbinic literature, and that is the rabbis are absolutely ignorant of all things Africa. Right? And so, like non-Africans from time immemorial, they make up stuff about Africa for purely literary purposes. Don't mistake this for anything about, you're not going to learn about Africa by studying the Talmud. Except that the word Afriki, the word for Africa, is an ancient, ancient word. That is true. So why are their feet wide? And he says again, that's a great question, and that's because they live in watery marshes. Right? So if you live in a very watery place, apparently your feet absorb some of that water and they just get wider and wider. This, by the way, is why Los Angelinos have very narrow, petite feet, because we got no water. So the man says, I'm worried because I worry you might get angry, but I have a lot of questions. So Hillel has his robe on, and he sits down and said, ask whatever questions you want. And at this point, the man kind of gives it up and says, are you Hillel, who is called the Nasi, the prince? Yes, he says. If that is you, the man said, may there not be many like you in Israel. Why, my son, says the patient Hillel. Well, because of you, I have lost 400 zoos. And he answered him, control your moods, because it's worth it to Hillel that you should have lost 400 zoos and even 400 more, and yet I will still not lose my temper. End of that story. Now that story reminds me of a popular Washington, D.C. story, and by popular I mean in the 1920s. There's a story told of President Calvin Coolidge, that he was at a social event, and you may not remember, but Coolidge was known for being a man of extremely few words. And one woman came up to him at a social gathering and said, I've made a bet that I can make you say 3 words in a row. And he turned to her and said, you lose. That's kind of this story with Hillel, right? But notice the model that's set up here is that a real rabbi, a patient rabbi, answers patently absurd questions, not during the normal work day, endlessly, however often a person wants to ask, no matter what the disturbance is or what they're legitimately doing at the time. That's the model of rabbi being laid out here by Hillel. And every rabbinical student who studies this story, except for the ones who study it with me, spend the rest of their life being oppressed by Hillel on the brain. Because a real rabbi does this. I was a congregational rabbi in Mission Viejo for 10 years. This is the period of my life that my mother calls when I was a rabbi. And I had a congregant, wonderful person, who told me that she wanted her teenage son to study Talmud. That's not so easy to find in Mission Viejo as you might think. So I looked through my calendar. I said, here, I'll tell you what. I teach for an hour on Sunday morning in the Sunday school. So how about from 9 to 10 I'll do this Hebrew school, and then from 10 to 11 I'll study with your son. And she said, well, that's not really the time he'd like to study. So we're right into a Hillel story, aren't we? And I said to this lovely parent, I said, look, it's great that your kid wants to learn Talmud, and it's great that you're so eager, and I'm giving you a time when we could do that, but that's the time I'm available. And her response, without missing a beat, was, what kind of a rabbi are you? Any other rabbi would give their eye teeth if a teenager wanted to study Talmud. Hillel. It's a Hillel story. Second Hillel story. Our rabbis taught, a certain heathen once came before Shammai and said to him, how many teachings do you have? That teachings here is a translation for the word Torah, which is literally what Torah means. And the answer he gave was, we have 2. We have a written Torah and an oral Torah. Anybody need an explanation? Right? Written Torah is the scroll in there, right? Because that Torah is in writing. But the rabbis taught that at the same time that God gave a written Torah, God gave an oral commentary that was gradually reduced into writing. In the Mishnah, in the Talmud, and even today, when the sage comes up with a new teaching of Torah that is true and divine and revealing, that too is part of the oral Torah that was given at Sinai. So that's the answer that Shammai is giving him, a written and oral Torah. And the heathen says, I'm willing to believe you with respect to the written Torah, but not with respect to the oral Torah. So make me a convert on the condition that you teach me only the written Torah. I just want to say in sympathy to this guy that many contemporary American Jews think they think that too. Meaning, we've all encountered Jews who say, well, I believe that God gave the Torah, I just don't believe in the rabbi stuff. Although when you push them a little further, it turns out they actually don't think God gave the written Torah either. They just think God gave the parts of the Torah that they think you should be observing. And so this guy is going to convert on condition. Here's the part of the Torah I'll accept, and the rest I'm going to reject. Convert me on that condition. And Shammai gets all annoyed, and he scolds him, and he chases him away. So then he goes before the patient Hillel, the wonderful Hillel. And Hillel, hearing those conditions, accepted him as a convert. Boom, converted him. And then on the first day that they were meeting after conversion, Hillel then started to teach him the Hebrew alphabet. This is an aleph. This is a bet. This is a gimel. This is a dalet. The next day when the man came back, he taught him the same 4 letters, but he mixed them up. Yesterday, the one that I taught you was an aleph. That's really a dalet. The one that I taught you was a bet. That's actually a gimel. And the man got confused, and he said, wait, you didn't teach it that way yesterday. And so Hillel said to him, well, I guess you're going to have to rely on my teachings then, right? So you'll have to rely on my teachings about the oral Torah too. I don't for the life of me understand how people hear this story and don't get mad at Hillel. Right? You go to the rabbi, you tell him what you're willing to do and not do, and one rabbi respects your agency enough to say, sorry, I get that that's your conditions. I can't meet those conditions. Go away. But the second rabbi, who's the alleged hero of this story, is Mr. Manipulation. He has no intention of accepting the ground rules that this would-be convert wants to give him. He knows from the beginning that you can't convert and not accept the written Torah too, but he's Hillel. So what does he do? He lies. He says, sure, no problem. And then he sets up this thing where 2 days later, and let me just remind you what a man has to do in order to convert to Judaism. There are things that don't grow back. Sorry, was that too graphic for DC? And then 2 days later, Hillel forces him to realize that it's a bogus deal all along. I don't think that's a nice Hillel story. I think that's a nasty, manipulative Hillel story. Give me Shammai any day. You can have a conversation and disagree. Here comes another of the same kind of story. This one is so famous that it made it onto the menorah. On another occasion, it happened that a certain heathen came before Shammai and said, make me convert on condition that you can teach the whole Torah while I stand on 1 foot. Can we just agree that such a person deserves profound corporeal pain? You just heard your rabbi gushing about Torah and what a source of life it is. And then you're going to have the temerity to say to her, okay, fine. If you can reduce that whole life-giving Torah of yours to what it takes for me to stand on 1 foot, then I'll buy in. Would you do that to a professor of Shakespeare? I'm interested in this Shakespeare of yours. So you have 3 seconds to tell me everything I need to know about Shakespeare. Go away. I'm really interested in, I don't know, cosmology. Can you boil it down to a single sentence? Go away. So he says that to Shammai, and I love this. I want to have a statue made of this. Shammai repulsed him with a builder's cubit, which was in his hand. Do you all know what a builder's cubit looks like? A builder's cubit is like as long as a yardstick, and then it's got this right angle thing with sharp points on both sides. It's used for drawing right angles or for burying in the back of someone who's annoying you. One of the two. You should have them made with the synagogue logo. Truly authentic Torah is taught here. So he chases the guy away, and the guy goes to Hillel. And Hillel says, it's beautiful. What is hateful to you, don't do to your neighbor. That is the whole Torah. The rest is commentary. Go and learn it. Let me ask you a hypothetical question. Let's say you knew nothing about Judaism, and someone told you, here's all you need to know about Judaism, is play nice with others. The rest are details. Do you then feel equipped to go and have a rich, full Jewish life? I don't. But that's what Hillel said. And of course, the poor guy, he goes away saying, oh, that's awesome. I now know everything I need to know about Judaism. And then the first time he goes to a deli and he tries to order pastrami on white bread with mayo, which, by the way, is the first time I was in a kosher deli, and I tried to order that because it's delicious. Give me a break. I'm from San Francisco. And I also know that mayonnaise is not dairy, so it's actually okay. But the person I was having that meal, don't shake your head at me, Rabbi. The person I was having lunch with, or trying to when I ordered that delicious sandwich, leaned over and said, Brad, if you order that, I'm leaving. And I didn't even have time to be shocked by what he said, because the waitress said to him, not to me. She wouldn't even talk to me at that point. She turned to him and said, don't worry, I wouldn't serve it. And I got pastrami on rye with mustard, which is not bad. Last of these 2 more stories. On another occasion, it happened that a certain heathen was passing behind a Beit Midrash, a house of learning, when he heard a teacher reciting the following verse. These are the garments which they shall use to make a breastplate and an ephod. And he said, wow, I like bling. I'd be one of them if I could wear that stuff. So he said, who's that made for? And he was told, well, that's a garment for the high priest. So the heathen said, I will convert in order that I can be made a high priest, because I like the outfit. That was my first thought, by the way, when as a youngster I saw Bishop Tutu, who it turns out has other claims to fame in addition, but those purple shirts, those were magnificent. I wanted to be clergy so I could have a shirt like that. Imagine my disappointment when all you get as a rabbi is this. So the heathen says he'll convert in order to be a high priest so that he can wear those pretty pieces of jewelry too. So he went to Shammai and he said, hey, I have a deal for you. I will convert to Judaism if you will make me high priest. And Shammai had not put away the builder's cubit. because these people keep coming at you. So then he went to Hillel, and Hillel converted him. Same conditions. I'll convert if you make me high priest. Hillel said, come on, let's dunk. And then Hillel said, can anyone be made a king without knowing the arts of government? The answer is no. So Hillel said, so okay, even if what you wanted to do was become a king, and the high priest is a kind of king, so you need to study the laws of Jewish government, so go sit down, start studying Torah. So the man sat down and he starts reading, and when he got to the verse that says that the stranger that approaches the altar shall be put to death, he said, who's that talking about? And the answer was, anyone who's not a Cohen, even up to King David. And the guy said, my goodness. Here he comes up with one of my favorite Latin terms, a fortiori. A fortiori is a kind of argument like kal vachomer. That's where you argue from a major influence to a minor, or a minor influence to a major influence. Your rabbis can give you lots of examples of those. They're used in American law no less than in Jewish law. But he gives him this, you're going to see that argument. If the children of Israel, who are called God's children, and God designated them in love, if those people can't approach the altar, then how much the more so someone who isn't born part of Israel? And he realizes that he can't become a Kohen Gadol. Now I stopped that story here. We're going to see how it finishes in a bit. Don't look down. Because I want to point out to you, who should this guy be mad at? Hillel or Shammai? Hillel! Shammai was just telling him the truth. There's a little transparency here and a couple swings of the big stick. Right? He's just telling him, you can't convert on that condition. You can't become a Kohen Gadol. A couple years ago, I celebrated 20 years of running the rabbinical school, and they asked me what I wanted. And I said, I'd like to be a Kohen. You know that old Jewish joke, right? Except not in my case. In my case, there are no, you do a past life regression from me and all the way back to the protoplasm, nobody. There's just nobody all the way back. Okay, but he doesn't get mad at Hillel, who lied to him. He gets mad at Shammai. He went before Shammai and said to him, am I then eligible to be a high priest? Isn't it written in the Torah that if you come near, you're going to die? And he went before Hillel and he said, oh, gentle Hillel, blessings rest on your head for bringing me under the wings of Shekhinah. And sometime later, all three converts met in one place. And they said, Shammai's impatient tried to drive us from the world, but Hillel's gentleness brought us under God's wings. How many rabbis wake up in the morning with the sense that they can't possibly do what everyone needs them to do? There's no way. How many rabbis start off the day and end the day with a sense of the endless disappointment, the calls they didn't get to, the visits they weren't able to make, the classes they should have been teaching, the people they should have visited, the letters they should have written, the thank you notes they should have written, the birthday calls they should, on and on, the committee meetings that they should have attended and didn't, right? It comes out of this impulse. Rabbis know everything, are everywhere, and are infinitely patient at the sacrifice of their own humanity. This year you've been studying partnership. These stories are the death of partnership. You can't have partnership if you don't have agency. You have wonderful rabbis, the best. They can't Jew for you. They can help you Jew better. They can help you learn Torah deeper. They can help you fill your life with the joy of mitzvot. But the driver's seat of your Judaism, like the driver's seat of your life choices, has room only for you. And everyone else plays a supporting role in that. Partnership is when you bring the fullness of your intellect and experiences and lives to the table, and then the rabbis have the opportunity to do the same, and then in the interactions that happen together, well, magic happens. Torah comes alive. But if in synagogue after synagogue, American Jews go passive, and they expect the rabbi to do all the dancing at Simchas Torah while we watch, and all the singing in the synagogue while we watch, and the Torah reading, and the interpretations, and the leading of prayers, and the comforting mourners, if they're supposed to do all of that, and we just wait, well, you're going to be waiting a long time. Because even Hillel couldn't possibly have been Hillel in that way. And it's not healthy. So what I want to leave you with is that these stories come from a time of hierarchy and of aristocracy. And they reflect that. They import that. And here, Rabbinic Judaism is not alone. Rabbinic Judaism does that far less than other religions, of importing imperial standards into the realm of faith, culture, and morality. But I want to remind you that what is truly unprecedented in the Torah, I mean this both as a theological and a historical claim, is the Torah makes the unprecedented assertion that the creator of the universe cares about common people. This year was my year with Homer. I don't mean Homer Simpson. I just finished the Iliad and the Odyssey. They're amazing books. You should read them. They come from around the same time as the prophet Jeremiah, so it's really interesting to look at the different choices. There is not a single non-aristocrat mentioned in either book. Not one. The few slaves who get quoted in the Odyssey are princes who were kidnapped from their parents' court. Not a single common person. And the Torah starts with the creator of heaven and earth talking to a nobody. And then talking to more nobodies. And then a whole nation of nobodies become the focus of God's attention. It's breathtakingly unprecedented. And the assertion that the universe as a whole is deeply interested, not simply in the rich and the powerful and the glorified, but in the everyday, in the common. Well, that's so breathtaking, we're still trying to catch up to that. And this Hillel story, charming as it is until you think about it, is slipping back into that Iliad Odyssey mode. Rabbis are human beings who, like you, love Torah, and like you, love being helpful. And they're lucky enough to have a profession in which that's made easier for them to do rather than harder. And in that, they can help mobilize a community. But I want to encourage you, when you're looking for a rabbi who respects your adulthood, look for the guy who's holding the stick. Thank you.
Going to take some questions? You could say no after that talk. Just before we do that, Ziegler rabbis who are in the room, can you just raise your hand and say hello? I want you to see. If you'd like to bring him to talk to your congregants, I have his number. this area has the largest concentration of Ziegler School alumni outside of Los Angeles in the world, and it is not surprising to anybody that Rabbi Artson's students would all come to be in the room to hear him teach like that. So thank you. Questions? They need to be on the mic because of the people who are following, so you hold on.
As a congregant, I know that sometimes it's tough to actually approach a rabbi with an ask and request for help. And so once one does, it might be from a place of immense need, and when that rabbi is busy or unavailable and so forth. So I wanted to have you talk a little more about that type of relationship versus the infantile one.
So look, it's hard to know. The question is that sometimes it's just rabbis aren't available. So you want them to be there for a question or a conversation or a real discussion, but they're doing triage with their calendar, and so they're only going from emergency to emergency. So that is a real problem in how we have structured the Jewish community. And let me, by way of alternative choices, do something rarely done by a conservative rabbi. Let me praise Chabad. Because Chabad has a very different model. What Chabad does is flood the market. Right? Everybody and their brother is a rabbi in the Chabad world. And that means they have and they don't have a building fund or a ritual committee. Right? So the rabbis have time to spend endless time with people, and in Mission Viejo, the Chabad rabbi and his wife would spend the week before Purim baking hamantashen and dipping them in chocolate, and then they would drive every street of Mission Viejo looking for mezuzahs so they could leave a bucket of chocolate-covered hamantashen, which were delicious. Because I would drive after them and I would take them. But what we do is we create a corporate structure complete with budgets and edifices and committees. But we didn't do that. But we have to deal with that. Right? And then we wonder why the 2 or 3 rabbis that we've hired aren't available for what we would like to be rabbinic conversations. Meanwhile, I'd imagine, I'm not speaking about the rabbis here, but I know rabbis around the country who would love nothing more than to have the job that makes them available for those conversations and not for the committee work that they need to be attending to, or the budgets, or hiring and firing, or staffing, or any number of other things. So here I'm going to invite you back into that Shammai place, right? I never like it when I call customer service and they say, due to the high volume of calls, the wait time is excitingly long. And I say to the phone, because there's no person to say it to, and my dog walks out of the room when I get this tone, I say, it's not because there are too many calls. It's because you're not paying for enough people to answer the phone. So the challenge I want to turn back to you is, if you want rabbis available for those conversations, then you should look at how you're spending your money as an institution. And maybe what you need to do is find a way to hire another 2 or 3 rabbis so that there's enough rabbis for the actual community. You know, in the good old days in Eastern Europe when we were getting killed all the time, before we got killed, there would be 15 of us and a rabbi and no building fund. Right? So we have modeled ourselves on a church model. Right? We have membership dues, we have glorious big buildings, and then we don't have enough rabbis to actually do the Jewish living that we want. And I'm not blaming it. I mean, there are good historical reasons why American Jewry made the choices it made. But you know what? Those people are not coming back into this building. So at this point, this building is yours. So if we don't like the choices they made for us, then we need to think about how we move to make the choices that work for us. And I will tell you, I've seen in this congregation you probably don't know this, but the Artsons are regular Shabbat guests of this congregation. And I did want to say while I was here, would you mind moving your services by 3 hours? Because 6:30 on a Saturday morning, I'm not even waking up for your rabbis at that time, right? But part of what gets Ilana, my wife, here every Shabbat is she has her needs met. And she uniquely has her needs met by what you've put together here, which is in many ways unconventional convention. So keep doing that. Keep innovating and keep thinking. And if there's a need for different rabbinic access, then instead of just expecting the same staff to do more, let's think about what can we do to bring more people who have those skills unencumbered by the things that distract them from doing what we want them to do.
Hi, thank you for this thought-provoking conversation. Beyond boundaries setting and expectation setting, what else has Judaism suffered from by following Hillel over Shammai? Where else do we see the implications of this decision in Jewish life?
Well, I mean, I don't want to put too much. I love Hillel too, you know, and I think at the end of the day, I would probably be a member of the House of Hillel and just be bone tired and weary, like every member of the House of Hillel. So what Hillel gave us positively is the virtue of seeing each person as of worth. So that even if at first it sounds like it's nonsense they're talking about, there's a reason why they're harping on that nonsense, and your job is to figure that out. I love that. But I would say the second thing that's challenging in the Hillel model is that you don't ever look anything up. Right? Because if you look something up, you're admitting you're not a real rabbi. And that afflicts us rabbis even when there are no non-rabbis in the room. God forbid you should let a colleague know that you don't know something. So in my household, and I say this with her present, so I'm not speaking behind her back, we have two kinds of facts. We have facts and shira facts. Right? And a shira fact, my beloved daughter, is if she doesn't know something, she'll just make it up and say it very authoritatively. And being that she's my daughter, she's really good at it. Like, it takes you a while to realize that was a shira fact. And so by the time she was 12, I would say to her, honey, is that true or is that a shira fact? And she would say, it's a shira fact. But I think rabbis suffer from shira factness. And I think that comes from the Hillel stories too. Like, I don't know why people's feet get wide, and I don't know why they have thicker eyes than other people. Ask someone who knows that stuff. Or let's look it up together. Or you have Google, tell me when you find out. Right? But I think that sense that you're not really, and the problem, of course, is that no rabbi knows it all. I had a teacher in rabbinical school who knew everything, or so we thought. And one of the students said, you know, I'll never be like you. I'll never know everything. And what he said, I thought, was life-changing. He said, compared to you, I know a lot. Compared to the tradition, I know nothing. And I think if we could implement that awareness, that could make all of us much healthier.
Not a question, it's a suggestion. If someone is coming to you and you feel like you can't look something up and your colleagues are giving you a hard time, remind them that there are two instances that I can think of when Moses didn't know the answer and had to go look it up.
Yes, but he had a lifetime contract. And no, I understand he couldn't manage it well, but the other thing he had that I've always envied is the ability to have the earth open and swallow people. I keep a list in my pocket. None of the alumni who are here are on that list, but some of their classmates unlike some synagogues. Do you want to share that with them, or are we done? And any other comments, questions, statements? All right. Thank you very much, everybody. It was lively to learn together.